Right, hello there everybody, welcome to the second part of the Canterville Ghost, and I will also be reviewing Doctor Who Survival, the 7th Doctor story. I thought I might as well do the Doctor Who reviews while I'm doing this. Sorry for the lateness of this video. I was going to do this last night, but by the time I had my dinner I just thought I'd leave it for the morning. So anyway, on with the Canterville Ghost Part 2, and then Doctor Who Survival. Canterville Ghost Part 2. The next morning, when the Otis family met at breakfast, they discussed the ghost at some length. The United States Minister was naturally a little annoyed to find that his present had not been accepted. "I had no wish," he said, "to do the ghost any personal injury, and I must say that considering the length of time he had been in the house, I don't think it is all polite to throw pillows at him." A very just remark, at which I am sorry to say. The twins burst into shouts of laughter. "Upon the other hand," he continued, "if he really declines to use the Rising Sun lubricant, we shall have to take his chairs away from him. It will be quite impossible to sleep with such a noise going on outside the bedrooms." For the rest of the week, however, they were undisturbed. The only thing that excited any attention being the continual revival of the bloodstain in on the library floor. This certainly was very strange, as the door was always locked at night by Mr. Otis, and the windows kept closely barred. The chameleon-like colour also of the stain excited a good deal of comment. Some mornings it was a dull, almost Indian red, then it would be vermilion, then a purple rich. And once then they came down for family prayers. According to the simple rule rites of the Free American Reformed Episcopalian Church, they found it a bright emerald green. The kaleidoscope changes naturally amused the party very much, and belts on the subject were freely made every evening. The only person who did not enter into the joke was little Virginia, who, for some unexplained reason, was always a good deal distressed at the sight of the bloodstain, and very nearly cried in the morning it was emerald green. The second appearance of the ghost was on Sunday night, shortly after they had gone to bed, after they were suddenly alarmed by a fearful crash in the hall. Rushing downstairs, they found a large suit of old armour had become detached from its stand, and had fallen on the stone floor. While seated in the high-backed chair was the Canterville ghost, rubbing his knees with an expression of acute agony on his face. The twins, having brought their pea shooters on them at once, discharged 2 pellets on him, with the accuracy of aim which can only be attained by long, careful practice on a withering master. While the United States Minister covered him with his revolver and called upon him in accordance with California etiquette to uphold his hands, the ghost started up with a wild shriek of rage and swept through them like a mist, extinguishing Washington Otis' candle as he passed, and so leaving them in a total darkness. On reaching the top of the staircase, he recovered himself and determined to give his celebrated peal of demonic laughter. This he had on more than one occasion found extremely useful. It is said to have turned Lord Raker's wig grey in a single night, and has certainly made 3 of Lady Canterville's French governesses give warning before their month was up. He accordingly laughed at his most horrible laugh. Till the old vaulted roof rang and rang again. But hardly had the fearful echo died away when a door opened and Mr. Otis came out with a light blue dressing gown. "I'm afraid you are far from well," he said, "and have brought you a bottle of Dr. Dubwell's tincture. If it is indigestion, you will find it the most excellent remedy." The ghost glared at her in fury and began at once to make preparations for turning himself into a large black dog, an accomplishment for which he was justly removed, and to which the family doctor always attributed the permanent idiocy of Lord Canterville's uncle. The honoured Thomas Horton, the uncle, the honoured Thomas Horton. The sound of approaching footsteps, however, made him hesitant to his full veiled purpose, so he contented himself with becoming faintly phosphorescent and vanished. Phosphorescent and vanished with a deep churchyard groan, just as the twins had come up to him. On reaching his room, he entirely broke down and became a prey to the most violent agitation. The vulgarity of the twins and the gross materialism of Mrs. Otis was naturally extremely annoying, but what really distressed him the most was he had been unable to wear the suit of mail. He had hoped that every modern American would be thrilled by the sight of a spectre in armour. If for no more sensible reason, at least one of the respect for the national poet Longfellow, over whose graceful and attractive poetry he himself had whiled away with a weary hour when cantervilles were up in town. Besides, in which his own suit, he had worn it with success at Kenilworth Torment, and had been highly complimented on it by no less a person than the Virgin Queen herself. Yet when he had put it on, he had completely overpowered by the weight on a huge breastplate and steel cassock, and had fallen heavily on the stove pavement, barking both his knees severely and bruising the knuckles on his right hand. For some days after this he was extremely ill, and hardly stirred out of his room at all except to keep the blood stain in proper repair. However, by taking great care of himself, he recovered and resolved to make a third attempt to frighten the United States Minister and his family. He selected Friday the 17th of August for his appearance, and spent most of that day in looking over the wardrobe, ultimately deciding in favour of a large scorched hat and a red feather, a whinging sheet frilled at the wrist and neck of a rusty dagger. Towards evening, a violent storm of rain came on, and the wind was so high that all the windows and doors in the old house shook and rattled. In fact, it was just such a weather as he loved. His plan of action was this. He was to make his way quietly to Washington Otis's room, gibber at him from the front of the bed, stab himself 3 times in the throat to the sound of slow music. He bore Washington a special grudge, becoming quite aware that it was he who was in the habit of removing the famous Canterville bloodstain by means of Pinkerton's Paragon detergent. Having reduced the reckless and foolhardy youth to a condition of abject terror, he was then to proceed to the room occupied by the United States Minister and his wife, and there to place a clammy hand on Mrs. Otis's forehead, while he hissed into her trembling husband's ear the awful secrets of his charnel house. With regard to little Virginia, he had not quite made up his mind. She had never insulted him in any way, and was pretty and gentle. A few hollow groans from the wardrobe, he thought, would be more than sufficient of it, or if that failed to wake her, he might grabble at the counterpane with palsy twitching fingers. As for the twins, he was quite determined to teach them a lesson. The first thing was to be done was, of course, to sit upon their chests, so as to produce the shifting sensation of a nightmare. Then, as their beds were quietly close to each other, to stand between them, and in the form of green icy cold corpse, till they become paralysed with fear, and finally to throw off the winding sheets and crawl around the room, with white bleached bones, one rolling eyeball in the character of Dumb Daniel, or Suicide Skeleton roll, in which he had more than one occasion produced a great effect, which he considered quite equal to his famous part of Martin the Maniac and the Masked Mystery. At 10:30 he heard the family going to bed. For some time he was disturbed by wild shrieks of laughter from the twins, who with light-hearted gaiety of schoolboys were evidently amusing themselves before they retired to rest. But at 11:15 all was still, and at midnight sounded, he sallied forth. The owl beat against the window panels, the raven croaked from the old yew tree, and the wind wandered moaning round the house like a lost soul. But the Otis family slept unconscious of their doom, and high above the rains and storm he could hear the steady snoring of the minister for the United States. He stepped steadily out of the wainscoting with an evil smile, and his cruel wrinkled mouth, with the moon hid her face in the cloud, as he stole past the great oriel window, where his own arms, those of his unmurdered wife, were blazoned in azures and gold. On and on he guided like an evil shadow. The very darkness seemed to loathe him as he passed. Once he thought he heard something call and stopped, but it was only the barking of a dog from the Red Farm. He went on, muttering strange 16th century curses, and on brandishing the rusty dagger in the midnight air. Finally he reached a corner for the passage that led to luckless Washington's room. For a moment he paused there, the wind blowing the long grey locks about his head, twisting in grotesque and fantastic folds, the nameless horror of a dead man's shroud. Then the clock struck the quarter, and he felt time was come. He chuckled to himself and turned the corner, and no sooner had he done so than a petition swore a wail of terror, who fell back and hid the blanched face in the long bony. He fell back and hid his blanched face in the long bony hands. Right in front of him was standing an honourable spectre, motionless as a graven image, monstrous as a madman's dream. Its head was bald and burnished, its face round and fat and white. Hideous laughter seemed to have withered its features into an eternal grin. From the eyes steamed rays of scarlet light. The mouth was as wide well of fire, and a hideous garment like to his own, swathed with its silent snows, Titan form. On its breast was the place card with a strange writing in antique characters, some scroll of shame, it seemed, some record of wild sins, some awful calendar of crime, and with its right hand it bore aloft a falchion of gleaming steel. Never having seen a ghost before, he naturally was terribly frightened, and after a second hasty glance at the awful phantom, he fled back to his room, tripping up in his long winding sheet as he sped down the corridor, and finally dropping the rusty dagger into the minister's jack boots, where it was found in the morning by the butler. Once in the privacy of his own apartment, he flung himself down on a small pallet bed and hid his face under the clothes. After a time, however, the brave old Canterville spirit asserted itself, and he determined to go and speak to the other ghost as soon as it was daylight. Accordingly, just as dawn was touching the hills with silver, he returned towards the spot where he first laid eyes on the grisly phantom, feeling that after all the two ghosts were better than one, and that by the aid of his new friend he might safely grapple with the twins. On reaching the spot, however, a terrible sight met his gaze. Something had evidently happened to the spectre, for the light had entirely faded from its hollow eyes, and the gleaming falcon had fallen from its hand, and it was leaning up against the wall, strained and uncomfortable attitude. He rushed forward and seized it in his arms, when to the horror he had slipped off and rolled off on the floor, and body assumed a recumbent of posture, and found himself clasping a white dimity bed curtain with a sweeping brush, a kitchen cleaver, and hollow turnip lying at his feet. Unable to understand the curious transformation, he clutched the place card with a feverish haste, and there in the grey morning light he read the fearful words: "Ye old ghost, ye old only true and original spook, beware of the imitations, all others are counterfeit." And there we shall leave it. Part 3 tomorrow. Yes, so Doctor Who's survival. This is the Seventh Doctor's last story, and the final story of the classic series. It's actually a good story, and it involves the Master trying to escape from the planet of the Cheetah People, and the Doctor arrived taking Ace to her town, Perivale. And there they discover these people have gone missing. The Master's been using this cat-like creature to transport these people into food for the cheetah people and taking them to their planet. And the Doctor stumbles upon this, and of course, having been transported to the cheetah planet people, he finds the Master there, and the Master has somehow transformed himself into one of the cheetah people as such. He was turning into a half cat or something, and all of old Ace's friends are there as well. And Midge, one of her friends, actually attacks one of the cats and becomes like a creature himself. And the Master uses this to transport himself back to Earth. And Midge tries to attack the Doctor, and it all goes pear-shaped, and the Doctor and the Master have a fight, and the Doctor wins, and so yeah, it's a good story. It was a good round-off story. By this time, the Doctor had again found especially the Seventh Doctor had found his footing, and they come up with some good stories by then. The Curse of Fenric, Battlefield, and it really felt like that it'd find its way until it was cancelled. Well, ceremony put to rest for a little while until they had the Doctor Who movie way back in 1996, and they were called the Wilderness Years. So yeah, it was a good story. It was a good story. It was good, and the little speech at the end with the tea's getting cold. Come on, Ace, we've got work to do. As they walk off into the sunset of the TARDIS, as Ace calls it, her home. So yeah, it's a good story. It's a good round-off story for the classic era. And of course, Doctor Who was brought back in 1996 with the Doctor Who movie, which I will do a review tomorrow of it. But that's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed me reading The Canterville Ghost. I'm sorry if I haven't been directly looking at the camera while I'm reading it. To be fair, I haven't read this before, so this is the first time of me reading it, and it's by Oscar Wilde. So, but anyway, part 3 tomorrow, and the Doctor Who review of the movie. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you again tomorrow. Bye bye for now.